This evening, we're using Zoom as a replacement for in-person meetings as we can't meet in person due to the current COVID situation. We're going to go through the presentation. We'll have a little presentation from Kathy, our planner, as well as from the developers. And then afterwards, there will be a as we heard it and a question and answer period. During the question and answer period, if you have any comments that you'd like to make, you can go to the participants tab and raise your hand. It'll be in the bottom corner when you hit the participants tab, raise your hand, and then we'll see that you have a question you'd like to ask. We'll go in order of the hand raising function, and we will ask you to unmute your microphone. You can then answer or ask your question, and we will then pass it on to someone to answer for you. If the hand raising function doesn't work, feel free to just wave at the camera as well, and we can follow that and get your turn to speak. I'll now pass it over to Elizabeth, who will help moderate tonight's session.
Thank you, Mike. So hi, everyone, and welcome to the meeting or the public meeting for 521 Brigatine Avenue / 501 Khamsin Street. My name is Elizabeth White, and I'm here filling in for Charmaine Forgy, who's had to be pulled away. And I will be moderating this session. Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Host Nation. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Host Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Today, Ottawa is home to approximately 40,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Ottawa's Indigenous community is diverse, representing many nations, languages, and customs. The city honors the land of the First Peoples, as well as all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Ottawa and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. This is a statutory public meeting. When we get to the question and answer period, you can ask your question in the language of your choice, and we have staff who can answer in French or English. This presentation is also available in French. We can send you a copy after the meeting. Just note it when you sign in at the links provided. We are hoping we can create some respectful dialogue through the process today. There are a number of people in attendance this evening who are here to share information and answer questions, representing the City of Ottawa, the developer, and the developer's consultant. Before I introduce them, I just want to ask, is there any media present? If so, can you please identify yourself now? No? Okay, thank you very much. So with us today, we have Councillor Glenn Gower, Ward 6, Stittsville. We also have the lead planner on the file, Kathy Rigas. From FOTEN, we have planner Nico Church and senior planner Julie Carrera. From Stantec, we have transportation project engineer Ahmed Abdelnabi. And from Mattamy Homes, we have Connor Gallagher and Olivia Hughes. So now we can move to the agenda. So the goal of the meeting is to present the project information, clarify facts, and to hear your comments. Tonight's agenda will start with opening remarks from Councillor Gower. Then we'll review the planning process, the development proposal, questions and comments, and we'll wrap up with closing remarks. I'll now turn it over to Councillor Gower to make a few introductory remarks.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. Looking at the participant list, we have a lot of residents attending, which is always really a good thing. 521 Brigatine, I know this neighborhood really well. I've lived in the Fairwinds neighborhood for 11 years. And I think I moved in just before the Brigatine, Khamsin, Coriolis, that the south end of the neighborhood was built. So I know this neighborhood very well and often walk my dog right in this area as well. And although it's not necessarily a surprise that the stormwater management pond is going to be filled in and developed, that's always been part of the infrastructure plan for this neighborhood. I think residents have been contacting us surprised by what's being proposed by Mattamy, because it's not what they thought would be coming when you first bought your homes. So I do appreciate, want to thank residents for all of your emails, and I've spoken with several of you on the phone as well to understand your concerns. I've also had a chance with my team to speak with Mattamy as well. And I conveyed some of the consistent concerns that we've been hearing from residents around, architecture, around building height, around traffic concerns, and so on. And I'm looking forward to hearing Mattamy's conversation here today, and looking forward to hearing questions and some answers as well from residents to Mattamy and to our planning team. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining, and looking forward to the presentation today.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. So now we'll pass it over to Kathy Ragus, the lead planner, to take us through the planning process relating to 521 Brigatine / 501 Khamsin Street.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Kathy Ragus, the planner in Development Review, who is handling this particular application. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the planning process. So next slide, please. So this is a statutory public meeting. That's a step that's required for any application for a plan of subdivision. So there's a statement that I have to read. This is a statutory public meeting for a plan of subdivision within the City of Ottawa, required to be held under Section 5120B of the Planning Act. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the City of Ottawa in respect of this application, you must make a written request to me, Kathy Ragus, at the City of Ottawa, Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department, 110 Laurier West, Ottawa, Ontario. Next slide, please. So what is a plan of subdivision? Just to explain, a plan of subdivision is the process that divides a parcel of land into the lots and blocks for development, together with the new public streets. So that can include blocks for single family, for townhouse development. It can include parks, mixed use or commercial blocks, stormwater pond block, and institutional blocks for school sites. And so the one step in that process is what's called draft approval. So draft approval establishes the general layout of the subdivision. And so it'll set out what the street layout and the lot layout. And then it also includes a list of what are called draft plan conditions. And that's the complete list of conditions that can be up to 150 different items that the developer has to fulfill before they finish the process. So that includes items like the detailed engineering plans, streetscape plans, composite utility plans showing where all the utility boxes are located. So there are many different items that they have to do after draft approval. So in this case, we're at the beginning of the process, working towards the draft approval for the subdivision. Next slide, please. So this shows the subject site. It's located at 521 Brigatine and 501 Khamsin Street. So it's shown with the star on the air photo. So this is an air photo showing the general area. It includes the east part of the Fairwinds community. So the site, as you can see, is bounded by Poole Creek, runs to the north, Khamsin Street on the west, Brigatine on the south, and to the east, it's vacant land. The future extension of Robert Grant Avenue will be immediately to the east of this site. So the future extension of Robert Grant, which now only goes between Fernbank and Abbott Street, that will be eventually extended up to Hazeldean, and then later up farther north through the green swath that you see between the two commercial developments down in the right corner. So it will continue up immediately next to this site, up to Maple Grove, and then eventually north up to Palladium Drive. So this just establishes the framework of where the site is located. So the property, as Councillor Gower described, is occupied by a temporary stormwater pond. That temporary storm pond was established at the beginning of the subdivision, and it was intended to be there for a limited period of time until a permanent stormwater pond was constructed. And that stormwater pond would be on this vacant land to the east, which is a Richcraft subdivision. So that is in progress now. So at that point, the stormwater pond could be decommissioned. Next slide, please. So when we evaluate applications for development, we're looking at different policy documents that set the context for development. So the highest level of guiding document for development of the city is what's called the official plan. So the official plan sets a framework for development over the next 20 years or so. So you may have heard talk of the new official plan that's currently in progress. So this is something that the policy staff have been working on for over a year, and at the moment it's going through a number of public consultations. So at the current time, that's not in effect yet. So under the current official plan that we have, the illustration here is an excerpt of what's called Schedule B for the urban policy area. So in that schedule, the site shown with the little blue star is within the yellow. So that's what's called general urban area. And the general urban area allows a whole range of uses. It allows a full range of residential uses, whether it's detached, semi-detached, townhouse, and apartment dwellings. So the policies guiding the general urban area say that it shall provide a range of housing types to suit all life circumstances. So that's very general, but that's in the guiding document. There is nothing very, very specific. So as you can see, the green swath that cuts diagonally across, that means major open space, and that denotes the Poole Creek corridor. And the pink to the north, that's a mixed use center. But in this area, all of the Fairwinds community that you see is all yellow, general urban area. Next slide, please. Another guiding document that we have to have regard for an application in this area is what's called the Canada West Community Design Plan. That plan was done approximately 20 years ago, and it set out the policies for what's called the Canada West area. So that's shown on this slide. So it included a very large chunk of land all the way from Hazeldean up to the Highway 417. So it included, there were business park lands, commercial, residential. So the site is down near the bottom here where it shows the red arrow. So in this case, the yellow stands for residential, and there was residential A and residential B. This site is in the residential B, which allowed a range of residential uses, singles, semi-detached, townhouses, and apartments. So that was the difference between residential A and residential B, was that the A didn't include apartments, but B does. So here's the site tucked in next to Poole Creek Village and the future Robert Grant extension, which was shown as, at the time of the plan, it was called the North-South Arterial because it didn't have a name yet. So the site would be immediately to the west of that. Next slide, please. So this shows a zoning map of this part of the Fairwinds community. So all properties have a zoning that is applicable to them, and the zoning establishes the framework for what can be built. So it establishes what land uses are permitted, and it also sets out zoning provisions in terms of setback, height, and other aspects. So in this case, the zoning, here's the site, and it's actually affected by two zones. The red lines on this map show the zoning boundaries. So most of the site is zoned the R3YY exception 1297, and the part to the west along Khamsin Street, and then it also has a H holding provision, and the other part doesn't have the H. And so R3 is a zone, I'll sort of break it down. R3 is residential third density zone, and the permitted uses are detached homes, semi-detached, and townhouses. And the YY is what's called a subzone. So there are many subzones starting at A going to Z, and each one has a certain set of provisions in terms of what the required lot width is, the lot area, the various front, rear, side yard setbacks, and then there may be other provisions. And then the number 1297, that's what's called an exception zone. So often when we apply zoning, we tailor the zoning provisions to what is required. And in this case, when Fairwinds was established, there was exceptions to the R3YY that set out certain provisions with respect to setbacks, projections in terms of how far the eaves or the porches could project. So 1297 has a list of exceptions. And then the -H, H means there's a holding provision. And that means that the site can't be developed until something happens. So as you can see, the entire Fairwinds community is zoned residential third density zone. So everywhere in Fairwinds, the zoning would allow either singles, semis, or townhouses. So they're all permitted everywhere within this area. So you can see this is all R3YY. So it's all zoned to permit that range of uses. The O1 zone that you see, that's the Poole Creek corridor running through here. And the blocks that are O1, that means parks and open space. So that's where the parks are located. And as you can see, you can also see the zoning that has been applied to the Richcraft subdivision next door. So although that isn't under zoning, has been applied. So there again, it's an R3. That's what most new subdivisions are zoned, because we very rarely see what's called an R1, residential first density, that only allows singles. We generally do not use that zone anymore. It's most commonly found, for example, in some of the older neighborhoods of Stittsville. Next slide. So I kind of went over this already, but what does the current zoning allow? So the R3 allows detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwellings. Exception 1297 establishes site-specific setbacks. And the H means there's a holding provision where all uses are prohibited until the holding symbol is removed, except those that existed on July 14th, 2010. And I just said relates to decommissioning of the temporary storm pond. And so what that did was when the zoning was applied in July 2010, it simply meant that nothing could be built on this site until a number of technical issues relating to decommissioning of the storm pond had been carried out. So that process is just starting now. So through this rezoning, Mattamy has applied to lift this H, and for that we need certain engineering matters to have been addressed to our satisfaction so that we can lift the H and they can develop the pond. So they're not ready to develop it immediately, but they have submitted the technical studies that demonstrate how the pond will be decommissioned so that we can remove that H. Next slide, please. Okay, and now I'll leave it to Julie Carrera from FOTEN to explain the specifics of their proposal.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. We can move to the next slide, please. So this is the proposed concept plan. And as you probably all know, this portion of the Fairwinds community has been under development for a while. It was originally draft approved in 2009. And all of the homes except the lands we're speaking about this evening, which I'll refer to as phase 8, they were all developed in about 2012, 2013, and except for this phase 8, given that there was the temporary stormwater pond on that site. So the pond is expected to be decommissioned next year. And because draft approval of the original lot and street pattern for phase 8 has lapsed, Mattamy is required to submit a new subdivision application. And as Kathy mentioned, we also submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application to address a few minor changes to the existing zoning to reflect Mattamy's current products, which have evolved over time. So there are a total of 47 units planned. There's one full block of 32 traditional 2-story townhouses, which are the lots in blue. and then one row of 15 two-story detached units, which are backing onto the creek, which are the lots in yellow and gray. So 6 of the detached lots are 36-foot wide lots and 9 are 30-foot wide lots. So to reiterate, both the standard townhomes and the detached units would be 2 stories in height. Next slide, please. So this is an excerpt from the proposed draft plan, which shows the proposed lots. Phase 8 is outlined in blue. So the townhome lots have a depth of 25 meters, and the detached homes range in depth from 26 to 32 meters. So the proposed eastern extension of Brigatine has a right-of-way width of 16.5 meters, which is the same width as the rights-of-way throughout the rest of the subdivision. And therefore it's consistent with the existing community. And then you'll see that Brigatine is proposed to bend into a window street running parallel to the future north-south arterial of the Robert Grant. So basically, it will run parallel to the arterial, but there will be no vehicular access onto the arterial. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed siting plan. It shows the building footprints overlaid onto the proposed lot pattern. You can see along the top, along the northern end where the detached units are proposed, the creek kind of dips down a little bit south, and there's 2 units where the back wall of the proposed detached unit juts out just a little bit, not along the entire wall, but just like a little rectangle, about a third of the length of the back wall. So for those 2 lots, there is a projection into the required 6-meter rear yard setback. So we are requesting an exception for those 2 lots, but the rest of the wall meets the 6 meters. And next slide, please. So these are just, the next few slides show some examples of Mattamy's front elevations for both detached and townhouse units. So there's both traditional or craftsman elevations and transitional elevations. And Mattamy will select, sorry, you could go through the next couple of slides just to show, there we go. So Mattamy will select the styles of the townhome blocks to ensure that the proposed elevations are sympathetic to the existing community. I think there's one, yeah, there we go. Those are the townhouse. The left is the craftsman, the right is the transitional. Next slide, please. So this is a list of some of the proposed zoning changes, which are quite minor. I already mentioned the exception that's required to the rear yard setback for the 2 detached units. And some of the other tweaks are related to permitted projections and other zoning provisions that have been revised over time since the subdivision was originally draft approved in 2009. And we also, as Kathy mentioned, need to lift the holding zone that currently applies, given that the stormwater management conditions are now met. Next slide, please. So this is a list of zoning changes that we originally proposed when we submitted the applications. And just for some background, the reason we did this is because Mattamy and all of their communities have similar zones for consistency. They have a range of products, detached townhome, back-to-back townhome, and they always apply the same zoning for flexibility and just for consistency. So that's what we had done originally, just to bring it in line with the current zoning for more recent subdivisions. But given that it's 2-story townhomes and 2-story detached units that are proposed, we don't actually need to make these particular changes, such as the increase in height or and the maximum lot coverage actually isn't a problem for the proposed units. And the reduction in the minimum lot area, again, that was just because when they do back-to-back towns, which are not proposed here, they do have a smaller 81 square meter area, but they're not proposed here. So we can keep the existing 137 square meters. And then finally, the interior side yard setback between the townhome blocks, we can meet the existing zoning. So 1.2 meters is required and 1.5 meters is proposed. So it exceeds the minimum. And that is all from me. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Julie. So we'll be passing it back to Kathy now.
Okay. And Elizabeth, if you want to turn my camera on, you can. I had turned it off before and now it's telling me I can't turn it back on because it's under your control. But in any case, so what happens next? Subdivision. So we're going to continue to gather public comments. The 4-week comment period that was on the notice that everybody received, that ended just last week, but that's not a hard and fast deadline. So we're continuing to gather comments. So issues get resolved. We may have comments that we provide to the applicant, and that, there we go. And so we may ask for certain revisions or more information. And so that through that process, issues are resolved. And the next step is for me to prepare the conditions of draft approval. So we've seen the draft plan that Mattamy is proposing now. There may or may not be minor changes to it. And then I will work on the conditions of approval. So generally, most of those are standard. And as I mentioned, there's about 150 different conditions that are included. And then often we may need a few site-specific ones. So that suite of conditions would be developed. And then the next step is that I prepare an approval report for the subdivision. And the report is approved by the Manager of Development Review West. Now that includes a step with concurrence from the ward councillor. So both the applicant and the ward councillor have to concur or agree with the conditions of draft approval. So the councillor is provided a copy of the report in advance, and they basically give their concurrence with the conditions. And then after that, it's approved by my manager. And after that, notice of decision would be sent to anyone who commented, as well as anyone who signs in at this meeting. You would be added to my notification list, and we would send a notice of decision. Next slide, please. So this meeting is specifically required because we have a subdivision application, but we're also talking about the rezoning because they go hand in hand. So in terms of the rezoning process, what happens next is that, again, we'll continue to gather public comments, issues get resolved, and then typically we deal with a rezoning for a subdivision after draft approval. So after the subdivision has received draft approval, the staff report would be prepared, and that's considered by planning committee. So planning committee considers rezoning reports. They make a recommendation to city council. After approval, city council enacts the bylaw. And after the bylaw is enacted, there's a second notice that goes out to the public. So when this application started, we circulated a mail out notice to all property owners within 120 meters of the site. And we do that again after a bylaw passing. So notice of the bylaw passing is circulated to owners within 120 meters, and anyone outside that area who participated in this meeting or who provided comments to me. I keep a notification list of everyone who provides comments, and so they're notified. And then there's a 20-day appeal period where someone can file an objection. And then if there are no appeals, the bylaw comes into effect. So that's an overview of the rezoning process. Next slide, please. Okay, Elizabeth, were you going to do the as we heard it?
Yes, thank you. So before we get to the question and answer period, we want to thank those who have provided Kathy with comments ahead of time. And we wanted to show these comments now to help avoid as much repetition as possible during the Q&A period. So I'll just review these right now with everyone. So Mattamy told us that the north side of Brigatine would be developed with detached dwellings. Only detached dwellings would be built on Brigatine Avenue. We do not want 3-story townhouses across the street. The development will increase traffic on Brigatine Avenue. The townhouses will create on-street parking issues on Brigatine Avenue. The height increase to 14 meters isn't needed for 2-story townhouses. And the coverage increase and yard reductions will allow overdevelopment. So now we'll move to the full question and answer period. Just a reminder, some housekeeping rules. Please use the raised hand function on your participants bar or press *9 if you're here on the phone. If you could keep your questions fairly brief and to the point, that will ensure everyone gets a chance to be heard. And as well, if your question has already been asked, please feel free to just lower your hand And you can ask the questions in the language of your choice. So we have some questions received ahead of time, so we'll go through them each individually. So the first question that's already been submitted was, does this zoning change allow townhouses instead of singles?
Okay, I'll take that one, Elizabeth. The zoning change does not affect the land uses that are permitted. The R3 zone does allow singles, semi-detached, and townhouses. So the zoning change that is requested does not affect that. We've gone over what the substance of the rezoning is for. So I think that's been answered by the presentation. But keep in mind, these were questions that were sent to me within the last week or so. So the townhouses are permitted now is the brief answer to that.
Thanks, Kathy. So the next question, when we bought our home in 2013, we were told that Mattamy would build single homes on the north side of Brigatine and were given a plan showing the lots. Why not build singles as promised? Who would like to take this question?
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Originally the plan was to have detached units in that sort of center block. But as I mentioned in my presentation, the lot depth is 25 meters. And since draft approval, which was quite a while ago, there have been changes to the building code and just models in general, and detached units actually don't fit on those 25-meter deep lots. So that's why townhomes are now proposed.
Thanks, Julie. The next question we have is the rezoning will allow the houses to be bigger than what is allowed. Why aren't the current height, coverage, and setbacks respected?
I'll take that one. So as we described in the presentation, most of those exceptions that were being sought are no longer being sought. So as Julie explained, Mattamy has looked at the product that they're proposing and the current zoning provisions, and they're no longer asking for that change in height from 12 to 14 meters, or the increase in lot coverage, or the reduction in some of the yards.
Thanks. So next question, can this block be left as a natural area? Who would like to take that question?
I'll take that one as well, if you don't mind. No, this area can't be, it can't be left as a natural area. It's in fact not a natural area. There may be, for example, geese that use the pond, but this is a technical stormwater management facility, and it was always intended to be an interim measure. It was because Fairwinds developed years in advance of when the permanent stormwater pond would be built. Through that Canada West community design plan that I mentioned, there were specific stormwater ponds that were anticipated, but not everything was built right away, because often it depends on the timing of different developers doing their work. So this part of Fairwinds, this pond was needed until now, but Richcraft is moving ahead and they're building what's called the permanent pond 2. So once that gets built, this one won't be necessary. And the zoning is already in place. So Mattamy has the full right to develop it. It was always intended to be developed. And we've talked about like the old draft plan. And the situation was that back in about 2009, there was a draft plan for what was called phase 5. And it did include this block. And that's where it was thought there might be singles on that north side of Brigatine. But this entire parcel was part of that draft plan. So at that time, it was intended to be developed, and it was zoned residential to reflect the development that would take place. So it's simply been that there's been a lag in developing it because of these technical things with the pond that had to happen. But we can't just keep it as it is, because it is privately owned. It's not a city stormwater pond. The land is owned by Mattamy, and they have the full rights to develop it.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So our final previously submitted question was, how will extra traffic on our streets be handled, and what streets will the construction traffic use?
Again, I can handle that. And then in a moment, perhaps Mattamy's traffic consultant will can answer it. But just from the city's perspective, as I just described in the previous question, this site was always intended to be developed. So at the time of that draft plan for what was called Phase 5, a certain number of units were anticipated to be here. So the traffic impact study was done for Phase 5, and the road network was developed. So what is being proposed now is in keeping with what was anticipated through that draft plan. So the traffic basically was always expected. And as part of this application, Mattamy had to submit what's called a traffic impact screening form, which there are certain criteria and they have to answer yes or no to a series of questions, and certain triggers would mean that they would have to do a full traffic impact study. But in this case, that didn't happen because the number of houses is really what we always expected based on the zoning. And then I will let the consultant elaborate on that. Ahmed, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Kathy. To add to this, the development of the number of units, 47 units, is not high enough to introduce significant traffic to contribute to congestion. And as Kathy mentioned, so the City of Ottawa's process is basically a 5-step process. The first step is looking, do we need to perform a traffic impact study or not, or a complete traffic impact study? And in this case, with the proposed number of units, this is not required because the number of proposed units is not going to generate a significant amount of traffic using the roadway network. And that adds to my elaboration. If additional questions come up on this, I can elaborate more.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we'll move to questions from participants. First up, we have Chris White. We will unmute you now, Chris, and you can ask your question.
Hi, I just wanted to say thanks. I got a couple questions, and so bear with me. First of all, as you can imagine, some of our earlier concerns were mitigated by Mattamy not requesting the height requirements and the lot coverages. As you can imagine, those were some serious concerns we had. So thank you for conceding those, I guess, for lack of a better term. I guess my first question, I guess, is for Julie probably. With respect to the you stated the reason the towns were going in versus the singles was the 25-meter requirement for the new, sorry, I'm not in construction, so bear with me. The new lot requirements, so that it has to be more than 25 meters is my understanding for a single detached home. Is that correct, Julie?
Julie, can you answer?
Yes, I can. Yeah, so the lot depth of 25 meters, when you take that, and you still need a 6-meter rear yard. So from the back of the home to the back of their lot line, those new residents need 6 meters under the zoning, which we want to maintain because it's a good amount. It's a typical amount of space for a new home. So when you take that required rear yard and you add a home on top of it, a detached home, there have been changes to the building code, such as in particular, I'm thinking the angle of the stairs now has to be less steep, and just things over time have pushed out how the length of a detached home. And because of that, it no longer fits, but a townhome, which has a different design, does fit.
Thanks, Julie. Chris, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, sorry, I do. That leads me into my next question, because under the, and maybe this has been changed, but under the proposed requested changes, I guess, you're asking for the balconies to have a 0 meter to the lot line, as well as I apologize, I don't have the number off the top of my head, with decks being fairly close to less than a meter to the lot line. I'm just wondering what the rationale is behind having them so close. Is that because they're towns and not singles? And does that apply to both the singles on the other side as well?
Yeah, it actually applies. Like I mentioned in my presentation, Mattamy has a standard set of zoning provisions that they usually apply to all their new subdivisions. And over time, again, they get tweaked as models get tweaked. So those provisions that were in our rationale, which we're not proposing any changes to, are the provisions that Mattamy has looked at and has needed those variances. And if you look at the zoning of other developers, it's a very similar situation. I'm not sure if Mattamy wants to elaborate on that, but it applies from everything from a detached unit to a back-to-back townhome, which is not proposed here. But it covers off all of their models because when they build communities, as you see here, sometimes over time things change and they keep a consistent zoning in case there is a change. So that's why those provisions are being proposed here. But they're pretty standard. I could, if you want more information on a particular, like such as you mentioned, I think the balconies, we could get in touch with you afterwards and provide more information if you want to know exactly how that would apply to a lot.
Thanks, Julie. Chris, does that answer your question? Oh, let's unmute you there. Yeah.
I apologize. Sorry. Yeah, it does. I just, for me, the balcony coming right up to the lot line was, in my opinion, it was an issue, but I just, it was, maybe I'm just not understanding how that would work versus, a traditional house where it needs to be at least 2 meters, I think is my understanding.
Okay, thanks. Is that the rest of your questions or do you have another one?
I have a couple more, sorry.
Sure. Okay.
I guess the next major one was when we signed our original contract in 2013 or purchase agreement in 2015, we had to sign an agreement with respect to the Robert Grant extension to be going down the basically the end of Brigatine, what is supposed to be a circle for that, like the street. Is that sound barrier still going to be installed as previously stated by Mattamy in our original purchase agreement, or is that sound barrier being negated now because there's townhomes going in?
Julie, does this go to you? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I can definitely confirm for you, but for this phase that we're talking about this evening, there was a noise report prepared and it did propose a similar noise barrier in the rear yards of the new units. So I assume if these new forthcoming units require that noise wall, I assume the noise wall would also be installed in your property, but I can confirm with Mattamy and we can get back to you, but I don't see why that would change.
Okay, the reason I was asking was because in the original or the proposal for the zoning amendment, it's stating the distance to the LRT transit site as being fairly close, less than, I think it was 500 meters or something along those lines. However, if there's a sound barrier going down there, that distance isn't really accurate because they'd be traveling around that sound barrier, obviously, right? So.
Yeah, so what am I on mute now? The window street in this phase 8, while there won't be a vehicular connection to Robert Grant, the new north-south arterial, I assume there'll be some sort of pedestrian access. So for residents exiting their front door, I don't know how close you lived. Yeah, you must live pretty close to this phase.
I'm at 520 Brigatine.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, there's stations proposed to the north and the south. I don't know if Ahmed wants to add anything to the details of the stations, but generally it's considered within 600 meters radial distance of a station is what the city considers as relative, like a walking distance, like you're willing to walk if you're within 600 meters. It's a reasonable distance for a pedestrian to get to a station. So you'll see when you look at the zoning bylaw, there's lots of references to being within 600 meters. So that's just something we always point out when we're preparing planning rationales, because it does mean that those residents who live within that radius are, hopefully likely to walk to those stations in the future.
And Julie, to add to that as well, we don't know the exact design of how things are going to look like in terms of the future implementation of whether the roadway connection, in terms of more detailed design, those should be coming out as the city progresses the design phase of the roadways. The same goes for the LRT. We have sent an inquiry for the city to ask about if the definitive timeline has been determined, and we'll be looking for an answer on that.
Thanks, Ahmed. Chris, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah. And so that kind of leads me to my next question. The city's bylaw is 1.5 meters street parking in front of it, between or away from the driveway. And I noticed in your proposal there that you were stating that the one-car garage and the driveway would then allow street parking. I'm just wondering what steps Mattamy's taking to allow that 1.5 per division between driveways for a parked vehicle, because that's the city bylaw. It's under, I think, that section number.
So I'm not sure if we can pull back up the presentation, but when I had the siting plan up, you'll see that for both the townhomes and the detached units, we pair driveways so that two abutting homes will have their driveways right next to each other, and that allows for a larger space between pairs of driveways. So if every driveway was alternating and they weren't paired, then there would be very little on-street room for our cars. So that's why we, so if you see like the rectangles, so the building outlines the black, and then those red rectangles are the garages. So you'll see how they're paired on both the townhomes and the detached units. So that leaves enough room for a parked car between sets of driveways.
Thanks, Julie. Chris, do you have another question?
Yeah, so I was, again, I agree with you with respect to that, but when I, in my math, it still doesn't leave more than 3 meters, like, because you would technically need 3 meters on either side of that vehicle in order to be within the city bylaw, I'm not against the city bylaw, therefore being ticketed. But my understanding with that distance, I don't think that has an additional 3 meters plus the length of the car. I could be wrong, but that's just my understanding of when I reviewed the dimensions there, that I didn't think there was more than 3 meters plus the width of or the length of the car. Even if a small car, like I just used the Honda Civic as an example, but even a Honda Civic there isn't 3 meters on top of that length of the Honda Civic in between those. And I could be wrong, but that's how my math added up there.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Chris. Do you have any other questions?
Well, am I wrong in that statement with respect to the distance, or?
I'm not sure. Julie, are you able to answer that, or is that something?
I was just going to say that's the spacing that you see on this proposed siting plan is standard, and it's applied to all the subdivisions. So I feel like it would have been flagged in the past if it was an issue. I don't know, Kathy, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I was going to say the same thing, that the situation would be the same as it is for any other townhouses in Fairwinds. I'm not sure about the 1.5 you're talking about, but we always pair the driveways to allow the 2 yards side by side so a car can fit between the driveways.
Thanks, Kathy.
No, and I completely understand that. And I'm not saying that there's an issue, but I just know for a fact under the bylaw, it's 2017-301, there needs to be 1.5 meters on either side of that vehicle before a driveway. Otherwise it's in. So anyways, I'll move on. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but it was just a valid point that I was trying to bring up. And I guess the final question or concern that I had was with respect to on the, sorry, I'm just looking at I'm switching screens here to look at the map. On the, oh, I apologize. That was answered in another slide.
Oh, great.
That's it for me.
Thanks, Chris. So now we're going to move to Tim and Robin next. So if you just give us a moment to unmute you, then you can ask your question. Hello.
Hi there. Yeah, so thanks, Chris, for bringing that up. That was a question I had regarding bylaw 2017-301. Can you actually pull up the site plan and let us know in meters how much that distance is? Because I'm sorry to beat a horse, as Chris mentioned, but if a car is 3 meters and you need the additional 1.5 meter clearance on either side, that's a minimum of 6 meters. And I know you mentioned it's standard, but just, anecdotally, driving around the neighborhood in the townhouses, if you see a car parked in that space, there's definitely not the clearance on either side. Even on our street with singles, you park a street with houses, between detached homes, there's still not 1.5 meter clearance. There's really nowhere legally in Fairwinds that you can park with 1.5 meters on either side. So even though that might be the standard and that might be what exists, I don't believe it's in accordance with the bylaw. So I think you're kind of placating us saying it's standard. And I'd like to know the exact number, the distance in meters between the parking spaces. And if it's not, are you going to erect parking signs that say no parking at any time on the street?
Thanks, Robin.
So I was just, can someone bring up the siting plan again?
Yeah, we're working on that right now.
Great. So it's not, because it's not dimension, I thought we could use a lot width as a reference point. So if you look on the north, well, you won't be able to read it, but the north side of the townhome block, not the end unit on the left, but one unit in, where it says lot 30, if you can read that. It does dimension the lot width as 6.5 meters. So if you were to pick up that line and then move it in between the garage for lot 30 and the garage for lot 29, it's almost, they matched. It's hard to do obviously on this screen, and we could provide, actually, I think this plan was provided with the submission, so it should be online. But you can use that lot width dimension as a reference point because that's 6.5 meters. So if you trace out that width of that lot depth and then move it between the pair of driveways for lots 30 and 31 and the pair of driveways between lot 4, lots 28 and 29, to me, it looks almost exactly like the same lot width, around 6 meters. I don't know if hopefully that helps. I know it's hard to, it's very tiny on the screen right now, but hopefully you've seen on DevApps the plans and reports that have been posted there. Hopefully this
but
plan.
you're saying hopefully, and it looks like, and it's around, but can you please provide the exact number so that we ensure it's in compliance with the bylaw?
Yeah, we could have the person open up the plan in CAD and measure it for you. So if you send any comments to Kathy, we can do the math. We need to do a proper measurement. You need to open it in a design program.
I'd say that Julie's right in estimating it at 6 meters between driveways, because a townhouse lot is typically 6 meters wide. And if roughly half of that is garage, then the other 3 meters is grass. So it would be 3 meters of grass next to 3 meters of grass. And when you're talking about bylaw, I'm not sure about that 1.5, but just to be clear, that's not something in the zoning bylaw. So this layout is typical of the other townhouse developments in Fairwinds and virtually anywhere else in the city. So as Julie mentioned, we do like to pair the driveways so that we do have the 2 grassed areas side by side. So this is in keeping with the type of layout that we are looking for in a townhouse development.
Okay, thanks, Kathy and Julie. So what we'll do is I hear that they're going to be doing some measurements and following up with you so you have those concrete numbers that you're looking for. Tim and Robin, do you have another question?
I do. So it's just regarding the infill of the pond. So can you describe what that process is going to be like? I've heard in the past that you can pack it down and it means it has to sit last time before you develop, or you just let it sit and kind of naturally settle, and that sometimes can mean that it's longer to build. So can you let us know the plan and kind of what we can expect once the pond is filled in, how long thereafter houses will be built?
Yeah, I can walk you through the tentative timeline. So this timeline that I'm about to give you would be about the earliest that all this would happen. It could be later than that, but this is sort of the earliest it would happen. Because it is dependent on Richcraft building a stormwater management pond so that this one could be decommissioned. So the first step, as you mentioned, is the decommissioning of the pond. So summer 2022 would be the earliest. And they would remove the structures and then they would fill it in perhaps that fall 2022. And as you mentioned, they do need to wait for the soils to consolidate. And that's a process that's monitored, and we can't give an exact timeline, but we're anticipating that might continue into winter or spring 2023. So we're at spring 2023 and it's still just filling in the pond here and getting the site ready. So after that, they need to install the underground services and the new street, the eastern extension of Brigatine. So that would probably the earliest be summer 2023. And then lastly, they would start building the homes approximately fall 2023. And then the new homes would close in 2024. But again, this is all very tentative. It all depends on, first of all, the timing of the new pond, and secondly, the work involved in making the pond site ready for construction.
Thanks, Julie. Tim and Robin, do you have any additional questions?
I have one last question. So you mentioned that the pond is not natural and it was never intended to be there long term, and this has gone on for longer than it was intended to be there. So given that, there's a lot of wildlife that have taken up there and made it a home. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that, the plants that have developed there, the wildlife that have nested there, and what's going to be done for them when this gets filled in.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to point you to, there's an environmental impact statement and tree conservation report that was prepared in support of these applications. So it is about 7 pages long, so I won't go into details here, but it is available on the Dev Apps website. And if you don't have that website, I would email Kathy and then she could send you the link. But it is a detailed report on the environmental conditions of the site.
Thanks, Julie. Tim and Robin, was that your last question, or do you have a follow-up?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I just want to touch base. Andy had his hand up, but he removed it. If that's because your question's been answered, great. But if you do still want to be on the speaking list, you can pop your hand back up now or turn your camera on and indicate that you still have a question. But otherwise, then we're going to move on to Jason. So Jason, if you give us a moment to unmute you, you can ask your question.
Hi there. Thanks for hosting this. Hopefully you can all hear me. Give me a thumbs
Yes,
up. Yeah.
thanks, Jason.
Okay, perfect. Chris, I just want to thank you for putting together such a thoughtful, remarks. I wish I could do the same. I'm not quite able to do that kind of research, I guess. And yeah, I guess I think the biggest concerns that's been voiced again and again, and probably based on the comments you've received, have been pretty consistent. Is it's the densification is the biggest concern. And Julie, you mentioned that it's the lot sizes. Is there any thought to using like semi-detached instead of going from singles to like the most densified solution that you can in this area, like finding a middle ground and going to like a semi-detached that would help improve street parking? There seems to be a I think I used the term ostrich's head in the sand when I wrote Kathy email with feedback, and just I'm not wanting to accept people's actual behavior versus maybe the bylaws. And so the bylaws are one thing, but people's actual behavior is quite a bit different. So I can just imagine that when all those houses are going to have 2 cars, even though the City of Ottawa might say, yeah, there might be 1.3 cars, whatever it is per household. Most of them are going to have 2 cars. I can guarantee it, living in Stittsville. A whole bunch of them are going to put up, widen their driveway. There's not going to be enough room for all the street parking. It's already been said. So has there been a look at trying to find a common ground that makes people feel like we're being bait and switched here, from moving from a single home to townhomes? And one of the main reasons that I think a lot of us purchased homes in this area was because they were mostly because they were all in fact single homes. And so definitely feel like it's a bait and switch opportunity here where it's being changed. And I feel sort of quite frustrated, as I think most of us do. But has there been any thought to find another way to make this work instead of just going to the most dense solution possible?
Thanks, Jason. So I think the core of Jason's question there is, asking, is there a possibility to explore semis instead of towns? And what's your rationale there?
So I've worked on lots of Mattamy subdivisions and other subdivisions for other developers, and you might have noticed yourselves from driving around the suburbs that semi-detached aren't very common these days. Maybe one day they will become more common, and I don't know the particular reason, but townhomes are very popular, and they're one of Mattamy's built forms. So they do detached townhomes, regular townhomes, back-to-back townhomes where you have no rear yard and the 2 rows of towns are together. which would be a denser product than the proposed townhomes. And then obviously up from there, you can do various types of apartments. But so it's just townhomes are, one of Mattamy's main products. So I assume that's why they're being proposed here. I just wanted to talk about parking one more time. So just so you're aware, there are zoning requirements for the inside of the garages to be able to fit the minimum dimensions for a parking space. There are also zoning requirements. There's a front yard setback for the front wall of the building, but there's also a front yard setback to the attached garage so that there is sufficient room in the driveway from the garage towards the street. And then we've also already talked about on-street parking. And then just a reminder, with that window street that's proposed abutting the future north-south arterial, Robert Grant, that is an uninterrupted stretch. There's no vehicular connection to the future arterial. So that entire stretch of land does obviously on the east side of that road does not have driveways. So that is an uninterrupted stretch for additional on-street parking as well.
Thanks, Julie. So Jason, does that answer your question or do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess I just have a lot of comments that I've already sent, so I'll yield.
Thank you very much. So next we have Remy. You're up next, so just give us a moment and you'll be able to ask your question. There you go.
All right, hello. Many things have been mentioned already, which is great. I'm starting to understand the situation a little bit better. It's in regards to the traffic. I think like Jason said earlier, 2 cars per home. Even some people have 3 cars. And I'm just worried about all these 47 units, meaning 94 cars going down Gallantry Way in Brigatine. And there's a park on Brigatine. So I'm worried about the safety for the many families that live in this neighborhood. Brigatine has a nice, it has a park there. It's got a trail, a bridge, pedestrian bridge. And we live on Gallantry Way, and there's no traffic jams, but there's a lot of cars going up and down the road. So another 94 cars going down these 2 only ways in, which is Brigatine and Gallantry. I don't understand how I'm supposed to tolerate that and everybody else in the neighborhood. So I don't know if anybody could explain or how Mattamy or the city is going to deal with that extra amount of traffic. I know you've done your studies or whatever, but I don't know how they're done. But 94 cars is a lot of cars. So that would mean, let's say all 94 cars going in and out. That's 180 in and outs in a way if you do the math. So yeah, that's the main concern, is the safety for sure for all these families and children that live on these streets.
Thanks, Remy. So I think, yeah, that's a general concern around traffic. On that, I see you're unmuted. Would you like to take that?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Remy, for your question. So the question is 2-part. One is for the traffic safety component, and the other is regarding the parking. And when it comes to well, first, the number of trips that are being generated, or you reference to the 94 cars in and out, those are not, for example, something that is going to happen during the peak hour. So in theory, what is going to end up we use the City of Ottawa, or the City of Ottawa itself did some studies to define the number of trips being added to a roadway, and in this case, it's less than 60, which is basic. I can see Elizabeth talking. I'm not sure if Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Sorry, I was thinking you were talking to the conversation. You were on mute.
I was just having a technical moment.
Okay, so in terms of the traffic that is being generated, typically we look at the peak hours of the roadway, which is the AM and the PM. And during those peak hours, the number of trips that are going to be added to the roadway is not going to be significant enough to contribute to congestion. It's not something that you'll be feeling in terms of, yeah, it's an extra couple of seconds, more or less. That's in terms of the number of steps that are going to be added to the roadway. In terms of the safety component of your concern, Remy, the roadway Brigatine Avenue itself is a local roadway serving just residential developments. Even if one side, for example, of the roadway is filled out with on-street parking, that still leaves enough distance for traffic to navigate. Typically, those situations and within neighborhoods like this, we would look into lower traffic speeds and on-street parking, for example, that actually encourages vehicles on the roadway to drive a little bit at a lower or reduced speeds. I do hope that this answers your question. In terms of the 94 vehicles, the number of trips, yes, from a zoning or from a trip generation perspective, we're looking, for example, just at rough high-level math, very conservative, about just 35 or up to 30 to 35 trips. The study that, or the TIA itself did not dive into the detail of determining the number of trips because the number is not that significant to add to congestion to the roadway. I do hope that I did cover your points in terms of number of trips and then traffic and congestion, and in terms of safety. Please let me know if I did miss anything.
Thanks, Remy. Did that answer your question? And then after we kind of close out Remy, we'll go to Councillor Gower.
Sort of, yeah. I'm just, it's already bad as it is now. So that's probably why I'm bringing it up. I find that, you know, the cars are going up and down the street on Gallantry Way pretty fast. And it's just going to be another, you know, there's going to be a lot more cars. So it's, I mean, I can see you've done your studies and stuff. And I do realize it's not, there's certain times where it's busier than others, but it's still a lot.
Thanks, Remy. So Councillor Gower, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, if I could just on Remy's comment, because he's right, there are a lot of vehicles in the neighborhood, and
machinery and dump trucks and all that stuff, and tractors and trailers and, you know, trades. How are they going to get to this site?
Well, what I wanted to bring up was Fairwinds in particular is still a very young neighborhood, even though homes started being built in 2007, and you know, many people on immediately near this site have probably lived there for 8 or 9 years. If I could give a bit of context for city planning, Fairwinds has been designed as a neighborhood where it is more walkable than traditional suburbs. There's the Food Basics grocery store, there's the Shoppers Drug Mart. There will be, as we've already talked about, proximity to light rail. My hope would be that within 10 years, 15 years from now, you won't be in a situation where people feel that they need 2 cars or 3 cars. It will be in a situation where people do have the option to walk or to use transit as an alternative to owning multiple vehicles. It's already starting to happen. I appreciate that, yes, many homeowners in Fairwinds would have 2 vehicles, but if I look on my street, which is single homes, in the 6 homes, including my own, 3 of the homes have 2 vehicles and 3 of the homes have 1 vehicle. So we're already starting to see that shift where not everyone in Stittsville has 2 vehicles. But I do appreciate, Remy, your concern, because in the short term, when we don't have those transportation options, alternatives like transit, and when we don't have, say, a sidewalk connection to Canadian Tire Center or to Bell Sensplex, or a local school in the neighborhood, these are all things that are yet to be developed and built. It is difficult for families to go down to 1 car or 0 cars, but that is the intention as this community grows. And this neighborhood was designed not for the next 5 or 10 years, but for the next several decades. So just trying to add a little bit of context as to why the master plans for this community were developed as they were. In terms of construction traffic and so on, one thing that we're going to ask Mattamy is to do a pre-construction meeting with residents, that everyone's clear on timelines, on what the different stages of construction are, what the impacts are, and we'll be looking really carefully at how we can minimize the impact to existing residents as new homes are being built.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So now I see we're going to be circling back. Chris White, would you like to add an additional question?
Yes, I do have one more question, and I just wanted to point out that he texted me and said he's not really sure how to unmute himself or
Okay.
raise his hand. So after me, it just he does have a question. I guess my other question, Julia, just maybe it's for Julie or Connor. I'm not sure who directed that, but Julie had mentioned that she's done quite a bit of planning with Mattamy over the last little while here, and I'm just curious, like how many subdivisions? I guess the biggest issue that a lot of us have is that, you know, I'll give my house as an example. It's the Westland model. It's currently being sold in Barhaven as an example for roughly $879 plus upgrades, yada, yada, yada. But how many subdivisions would Mattamy normally go and sell where there's a Westland model, for an example, close to a 3,000 square foot home on the same street as a townhome? And I guess if we were to put in, and I understand that, you know, semis aren't as selling as popular, but I guess that's where a lot of us have the biggest issue is that we do feel like, as I think Scott mentioned, it does feel like a bit of a bait and switch. Like we were adamant, at least ourselves, myself and my wife, that, you know, this is what the zoning is now. This is what the lot plan is. We have it in our purchase agreement, what the actual lot plan was. And I understand plans change, but if Mattamy's not building the Westland, for example, on the same street as townhomes in their own subdivisions for resale value or sellability, why do we get shafted with that option, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Thanks, Chris.
And there.
You're good.
Yeah, okay, great. So actually, I don't know if you're familiar with some city initiatives building in better, smarter suburbs, or some more recent community design plans and secondary plans have been approved by the city. But there's been a big push from the city to mix up housing types so that we don't have streets upon streets of the same type, that there is a variety, there's different options for different people, and then often also different forms of tenure to rental is making a comeback, and condominiums and freehold. So in the new communities in Ottawa suburbs, we do try to, you'll see, like if you look at some of the policies in these new secondary plans, they do encourage a mixing of unit types within new communities. So while it might not have been common 10 years ago, it is becoming much more common now.
Thanks, Julie. Chris, does that answer your last question?
Well, I guess it does in some ways, and I understand the initiative. Actually, Glenn and I talked about it with respect to the LRT and the density within that 1 kilometer zone. So I do understand that, but I think that, you know, I'll be blunt, like if we had purchased our home in 2013 with the understanding there would have been townhomes across the street, I think you'll find most of the residents on the street may or may not have purchased. You may have had a different buyer. I personally wouldn't have purchased here knowing that there'd be a townhome. And that's why we had it included in our purchase agreement. So, and I understand that this is the plan that is right now, but, and I'm not, this isn't a question, it's more of a statement. I know that there's no requirement for you to stick to this original plan. If in a year from now or a year and a half from now, the demographic has changed, there is the option to reapply and change the type of townhome that will be built. And I think that's given the precedent of Mattamy's changing their mind. I guess that's where a lot of us feel that, you know, based on whatever happens here today, we just don't have a lot of confidence in the fact that what's being proposed today will be the end result.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I see that Vladimir has found the raise hand function, so you are next. So we'll just unmute you for your question.
Yes, hi everybody. Yeah, about the same stuff that Chris was talking about. We are actually facing north side, as it is right now. In the front of my driveway, it's lots of ice because of melting and everything. There's no sun in the afternoons, and if they put the, as he said, they can change. I know you guys are saying it's gonna be a 2-story townhomes, but what if they put the 3 stories? The stacked homes, whatever they call them. I won't see no sun in the afternoons at all, like on the north side at all. So that's to just continue on what Chris said. How is it possible to, like, we would like not to have them change to that height so they can build those homes. And like, I have no problem with anything else but that. That's my question. Is it anything could be done that like guarantee us that they're not going to build those stacked homes?
Thanks, Vladimir. Kathy?
I can address that. And the zoning that's on the site now, the residential third density zone, that doesn't allow the stacked units. That takes a different zone, what's called R4. So the zoning that is on the property now allows only singles, semi-detached, and townhouses. So Mattamy has said they're only planning to build the 2-story townhouses, and that they're dropping the request to increase the height from 12 to 14 meters. So the intent is simply 2-story townhouses.
Okay, thanks. Vladimir, is that your last question, or do you have a follow-up?
One more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I heard a gentleman was talking about the traffic in front there, and is there anything going to be done with that court across from the Brigatine Avenue there on the Gallantry on the other side, or Khamsin Gallantry? Yeah. It's very hard to get out from the neighborhood if you need to go left. Is it possible somebody put a traffic light in there? Maybe. It's really like I have a hard time getting out from my street. And somebody says it's not like it's going to be 97 cars. Nobody is going to have a car soon, like 1, 2 cars. My family will have very soon 4 cars. And right now we do have 2 cars. My boys are 19. We have 3 cars now, the 3rd driver. I don't see myself in the next 10 years using anything, because I do drive for a living, and kids, they need to go to school and whatever. They have a right to drive cars. I don't know how they plan to drop cars. I think the traffic will increase dramatically, actually. So is there anything to be done about getting out of that neighborhood, like on the Huntmar Street, left or right from us?
Thanks, Vladimir. Actually, I think that's a broader city kind of question. So, Councillor, I see your hands up. Maybe you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, a little bit of context. So there is going to be a traffic light built at the entrance to Food Basics. I know, Vladimir, that's not exactly where you're looking for, but I did want to give that update. That's going to happen. There's a couple of development proposals at that part of Huntmar, and there's always an intention to build a traffic light there. But once we get either new stores or a new building across the street near the keg, that's going to trigger the addition of a new traffic light. So that's a good thing. In terms of turning left out of Brigatine onto Huntmar, that road was built wide, and that's why there was a roundabout built just a little bit further north at Rosehill. So the idea is that if you wanted to turn left and didn't feel as a driver that you're comfortable doing that over the 3 lanes, that you could drive to the roundabout and kind of do that U-turn there. I know one of my concerns in that stretch of Huntmar is for the whole stretch of Huntmar between Maple Grove and Hazeldean Road, there's an island in the middle of the street, except for that small stretch in front of Coriolis and Brigatine and so on. And it's just a painted line in the middle. And it's something that we've also talked to the developers about funding, so we can get a curbed boulevard in between, so that's consistent the whole length. Because I know for people crossing the road to get to a bus stop or just to get to the other side of the neighborhood, it's very difficult to do that given the large width of Huntmar. So that the traffic light at Food Basics would help, but if we can also give that island in between to help people have a point where they can pause on the way over the street, that would help with safety as well.
Thanks, Councillor. Ahmed, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
No, Councillor Glenn did actually clarify this very greatly. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Vladimir, I see you turn your camera off. I think, does that mean your questions are answered? If so, it looks like it. So we've got a couple more questions on the list. So we're gonna go back to Tim and Robin. Oh, sorry, he does that. Sorry, Vladimir. Oh, you're good?
No, he's
Okay, sorry. It's hard to understand the hand gestures. So yes, Tim and Robin, can you, you're up next.
Hi again. So a moment ago, when Chris was asking a question, you talked about densification and building towns instead of singles will allow you to have kind of a mix of housing, make homeownership more accessible, make it closer to LRT. But you have the entire Richcraft development to the east. So I'm just wondering, why can you not focus on the densification there and just leave our little plot of land agreement with us to build singles?
Thanks, Robin.
Sure, yeah, I'm familiar with that Ridgecraft subdivision. We did do work on it, and again, it does have a range of uses. If you look at the zoning on Geo Ottawa, you'll see there they have some back-to-back townhome blocks, which are the ones I talked about before, which are the taller 3-story where they're pressed together with no backyards. So that is sort of a higher density product, and they are proposing that over there in addition to a range of detached and townhomes as well. So it's quite common in with all the developers I work with, even every phase that gets released these days, there is often a range of options to suit all the needs of various people. So, you know, again, while maybe in the past there was a lot of detached units in the suburbs, there is a much broader range these days, and it does accommodate a range of people, which, you know, if you look in the official plan, that is sort of one of the overarching policies, is to provide options for people. So both sides of future Robert Grant will have a variety of densities. But as Kathy mentioned, like, we're not talking stacked units here. Those aren't permitted, which are even taller, or apartments. They're not permitted here either. So it is sort of the detached to townhome range that the current zoning is, and that we're not changing. We're tweaking provisions that don't relate to use. So I don't know if you have any other questions, please ask.
Yeah, I guess this isn't so much of a question, and I'm appealing more to the city and less so to Mattamy. And this is kind of selfish, and I think I'm speaking on behalf of my neighbors, is to reject the townhouses, have them build singles, and then make Ridgecraft rezone, build a bunch of densified housing there, and then just leave it as it was planned to be for the 20 or 30 homeowners who in good faith bought our houses here with the intention that it would be a cohesive neighborhood with singles. So thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Okay. Kathy, are you trying to?
Yep. In terms of, there's nothing to refuse in terms of the townhouses. They are a permitted land use in the R3. So essentially we cannot refuse it because Mattamy is not requesting special permission or rezoning to allow the townhouses. They are permitted as of right in the zoning that's been in effect since 2010. So, and as Julie mentioned, under our official plan, we support providing a range of houses to suit all life circumstances. So that includes a range of housing, and townhouses are considered acceptable and compatible with detached homes. So no, we would not consider refusing this subdivision because it includes townhouses, simply because they are allowed. So Mattamy has the full choice of any permitted use that's allowed in the zone is what they can propose.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So I only see one more hand up at this point, and that's Jill. We're just going to unmute you. So once we do that, you will be able to ask your question. Oh, yeah,
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So this question's been asked, but I just want to bring it back up again with regards to the height of the townhouses. Can Mattamy give us a guarantee in writing that these townhouses won't be rezoned to back to 14 meters?
Thanks, Jill.
Yep.
So their current height, which is 12 meters, is what we're not proposing any change to that. As I said before, originally we were introducing the whole suite of Mattamy provisions because that's usually what we do in subdivisions. But given the community concern, we did drop that request because a typical two-story townhome and a two-story detached unit can fit within the 12-meter height limit. So there are no proposed changes to that. The zoning does go to planning committee. There's a report prepared by staff and it's publicly available. So that comes a bit later after draft approval. But you will see in that report what is being proposed, and that's what goes forward. So there's no intention to change the unit types. It's intended to be a two-story townhome.
Thanks, Julie. Gilles, do you have a follow-up question of any
Yeah,
kind?
further to that, intentions are well and good, but what are the guarantees that Mattamy will not reapply to change that height requirement?
Not sure if, is Connor still there from Mattamy? Connor, did you want to add anything or?
Okay, sorry, I just got muted. As Julie said, there's no plans to build anything else than what we proposed. If we did wanted to go over the back-to-backs, we would have come out with that plan. But the towns are what we're proposing, and there's no intention to stray from that.
Thanks, Connor. So Gilles, I think that's, do you have
That
any additional?
doesn't quite answer my question. The intentions when we all first started was for single homes, and they've changed their minds today. What's stopping them from not changing their minds again? And what guarantees do we have that they will not change their minds to put the higher townhomes in place? We're looking for a guarantee at the very least. We'd like to see this in writing from Mattamy.
Okay, I think, yeah, you've made that a strong point. Does anyone have anything else to add based on other than what we've kind of shared before? Okay, thanks, Jill. We do have a couple more people, so I know we're kind of set around 7:30, but let's see if we can get in a few more questions. So Lisa, I think you're next.
Hi, it's Tanner and Lisa here. This is more of a question for Glenn. I know there's a lot of concerns about traffic increasing, especially in the streets adjacent. Like we live on 500 Khamsin, so we'll be facing right up against the end of the townhouses. And we notice that when the winter comes, or even in the summer, there's always parking on both sides of the streets. And the more densification of this parking, it kind of clams up the whole neighborhood. A lot of the adjacent neighborhoods in the Mattamy development have no parking on one side of the street. And it's kind of a question that I've been meaning to bring up to the city for a while is there any plans or is there anything that they can do to put a no parking sign on one side of the street for, let's say, Khamsin and part of Brigatine and part of Glantry?
Yeah, so there is. If you want to email my office, Tanner, I'd be happy to share some of the process for how that's done. There's a couple ways that we can accomplish that. We do have winter one-sided parking restrictions in a lot of streets in Fairwinds, and those are usually done when the city's roads department that does the snow clearing recommends that it would be beneficial to help with snow clearing. There's also a petition process that residents on a street can follow to request different parking restrictions. But there's a bit of process and details around it. So if you wanted to email my office, I can have my team follow up with those details and we can give it a look.
Thanks, Councillor.
Yeah.
Anything
Sorry.
else?
Nope, I think that answers my question.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Glenn.
Thank you. So we've got one last person on the list so far, it looks like it. And, it's Brody. So if you just give us a moment to unmute you, you will have the floor.
Good evening, folks. Hope everybody's doing well.
Hi, Brody.
And I know this is it's probably been beat to death quite a bit, but and I thank you to Vladimir for you mentioning the Huntmar issue, because it's aptly named in our kind of corner of Brigatine, the Huntmar 500, because there's just no way you can get across there. And of course, Mr. Gower, thank you very much for replying to my email from Kathy. Much appreciated. With regards to the traffic, folks, I live at 423 and the folks across at 420. This could be directed to Julie for the future and Ahmed for the future. Don't make a corner like that. When I'm trying to pull out of my driveway, there's people coming down the street way too fast. There's kids in the street that like to cross the street, and it is way too tight. There definitely needs to be some more space in there. As I've mentioned before, I usually have to shovel about an extra 50 square feet. Not really a big deal. It's a first world problem, but it is a pain in the butt when I have to shovel that extra 50 feet in the winter time because and for the taxes that I pay. So my question is there going to be any sort of traffic reduction from the city? Can we put on, I've seen them in the middle of the roads, them little flappy things that, you know, if people hit them that, and in the middle of the roads to keep the traffic divided. Many times I've seen drivers coming from Huntmar along Brigatine, around the corner at 420 and then by the park. One person is going one way, cuts the corner too short and almost has a head-on collision or hits a kid on the other side. So Julie, Ahmed, for your consideration, because it just doesn't work. I'm telling you, and if I know your numbers are good, that's great and awesome. But numbers don't, because of the numbers don't tell the human factor of watching kids almost get hit in the street because people are coming down too fast. Now, it's because they're driving fast. You have no control over that, but if you made the street a bit wider, maybe that could help. So I'm just looking to see what can be done to limit the traffic at that corner of Brigatine and slow it down. Anyone?
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. I think as this is a broader traffic calming issue, I'll pass it over to Councillor Gower.
Yeah, thank you, Brody. So we have what's called temporary traffic calming. So those are the flex stakes that you see in the middle of the road. Also things that would qualify would be the radar speed boards. There's one on Huntmar just south of the neighborhood. And there's other measures as well. We don't have to wait for Mattamy. We don't have to wait for future development. Again, if you want to email my office, I don't think we've done an evaluation on the streets in this part of Fairwinds, but it's something that we can have the traffic engineers look at. They look at things like speed, they look at things like sight lines, and they make recommendations on what kind of temporary traffic calming measures might be necessary. And I believe as part of this development and the final approval, they'll also have to take a look at the street design and road design, and it gets evaluated by the city's traffic staff to make sure that it's being designed safely. And I'll tell you, the road design that was done in 2009 and 2007 in Fairwinds is very different than the road design being done in new communities. So it's something that I would hope we're going to see an upgrade and improvement on from the get-go, rather than having to add these temporary traffic calming measures afterwards.
Thanks, Councillor. Okay, so I think that gives a few options there for you, Brody. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Not really, but thank you very much, Mr. Gower. Greatly appreciated. And just for your guys' future consideration, because when I see a tractor trailer making deliveries around that corner, if there's a car parked on either side of the road, it's not going to make the corner, and that's not especially for the poor operator who has to get around there. And there's been numerous issues with large vehicles making deliveries and things like that. Doesn't work. So if we can change it for the future, that'd be great. And definitely, Mr. Gower, I will get in touch with you for some traffic calming ideas. Thanks for your time, folks. Greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Brody. So I think that's our list of questions. So what I'm going to do, I'll pass it over to Councillor Gower for some closing remarks.
Well, sure. Thank you. We've covered quite a bit. Thank you for all of the questions. I wanted to mention something because it's come up a number of times. People use the word bait and switch. I'm not sure that's completely fair to Mattamy, but I know what you're getting at. And it's a concern that I've had. Let me give you an example. I mean, people go in and they buy a home, and there's usually some really nice maps in the showroom with some color codes about a park here and a school here and different things like that. And what I find is that residents buying a home don't always know the right questions to ask. Sometimes the sales agents at the model homes aren't always trained to give the right answers. I'll give you an example of schools. We have 2 lots for future schools in Fairwinds. And I think most people, when they went and bought a home, looked at the map and saw future school and said, that's going to be great. My kids can walk to school just down the road. What you aren't told in that showroom is that it could be 7 years before that lot gets developed as a school, or in the case of the one on Parlaville in Fairwinds, I think it's going on 9 years, maybe 10 years now. Or there's another school lot over on Rose Hill, near Rose Hill and Santolina in the newer part of the neighborhood. That's dual zoned for school. And if the school boards don't take their option on that within 7 years, it could be actually built as homes, townhomes in the future. And that's not always clear when you're going in to buy a home. So it's something that I've raised a lot with home builders. And I've been wondering about how could we create a question and answer, things that home buyers could ask, and maybe even requirements that home builders should disclose, so people do have more clarity about what is or isn't allowed. So it is something I'm aware of and concerned about, because it can lead to a lot of questions to my office in the future, and also these kinds of meetings today, where although the land on that stormwater management pond has always been zoned for townhomes, that's not something that's always been publicized or front and center in terms of a plan. So that's a problem that we need to address. Thank you everyone for attending. I know everyone has busy lives with your family and your jobs, and I'm really glad that we had a good turnout from residents today. And I also want to thank the representatives from Mattamy and their consultants, and also Elizabeth, Mike, and Kathy from city staff, and Jordan and Catherine from my team as well, who've been listening in. There's a number of follow-ups that we've had committed to from city staff and from Mattamy. So hopefully we'll get that additional information soon, and have a really good night.
Thank you, Councillor. So yeah, we've gone just a little bit above our timeline, but if there's any questions and comments that come to mind, there's still more opportunities to share those. So I encourage you to sign in, as well as to use this comment sheet to keep the dialogue going. So thank you for spending your time with us this evening. We appreciate it. We know this is a challenging time, so thank you very much, and we hope you have a great evening. Good night.